And we're back.
Yay!
Welcome to the AutoAuthorities Podcast. My name is Jay Grossman. I'm the founder and CEO of iAutoAgent. We are real estate agents for cars. And this is my co-host, Mr.
David Marks with Quality Auto STL, home of trusted services with no surprises.
I don't know about you. Is there somebody else in the room with us right now?
Yeah, what the hell's he doing here?
Oh, it's our special guest, Micky Desai.
What the hell am I doing here?
That's what we're here to find out.
We're going to find out. Micky Desai has a podcast called The Thing About Cars. And we are going to hear some absolutely, and I'll stress the word absolutely, crazy car stories. Are you guys ready to do this?
Absolutely.
Have you ever felt like you were taken for a ride when buying, selling, or repairing your car? Well, not anymore. I'm Jay.
And I'm Dave.
And this is the podcast that tells you what to watch out for, whether you're buying, selling,
or repairing your car.
With 47 years of automotive experience, we are the Automotive Authorities. This podcast is sponsored by iAutoAgent. We're real estate agents for cars.
And Quality Auto STL, trusted services with no surprises.
Boom.
Booyah!
Man.
All right.
What
I am
an intro.
so excited. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
For those of you just joining us, we have a special guest, Micky Desai of The Thing About Cars. What is The Thing About Cars? Well, we're going to find out. But if you're just joining us right now, number one, we want to thank our sponsors, Podcastify.me. That's Podcastify.me. They are, I'll have to say, the brains behind this operation.
It's not me and you.
And if you want your own podcast, just like ours, contact Fritz. He runs that company and does a great job, and we're just very thankful to have him. And if you're watching on YouTube, please click the subscribe button in the right corner and the notification button. Am I doing the right corner there? And you can watch our pretty faces because this is recorded. But if you want to watch us live on Tuesday night, I'm sorry, actually, we just changed it. Tuesday afternoon at 12 p.m. Central Time. You can watch us live on the Facebook. Our Facebook, it's not a page, it's a group called the Auto Authorities Facebook group. And click the join group button. And as you're listening to this today, we're going to be meeting with Micky Desai of The Thing About Cars. Comment. Let us know what you think, because he's got some crazy stuff. and you know what? I'm trying to think how we met. We actually met from our producer, Fritz, who at Podcastify.me. Yeah. And basically, when I started learning more about Micky and his podcast, what's really cool about what he does like we do is we do everything raw and uncut. There is nothing planned here other than a couple points that we want to hit. And that's what makes it so authentic. And he's doing the same thing. So Micky, you have the floor. Tell us about yourself.
First of all, I have to bow down to your presence, you guys. You guys are awesome. That intro is awesome. Your energy is completely infectious, and I am glad to be here today. You say we have crazy stories, and we do have a really crazy crew. We work really, really hard to stay out of diagnosable range. So, but it's a fun bunch. The whole thing with The Thing About Cars started several years ago in a scrapyard. A friend of mine and I, Ben, my co-host, Ben and I, were walking a scrapyard. Literally, this guy was liquidating everything in his yard, and we thought maybe we could go get something to tinker with and shape up and drive around. And the long story short on that is nothing there was salvageable. But we ended up talking about cars that day. It was like 10 o'clock in the morning when we got there. And we went to go lunch after looking at the yard, walking the yard. And at some point I looked at my watch and I said, Ben, it's 4 o'clock. What, we're still talking about cars, how we should record these conversations. And that's where the whole thing started. One of the first priorities we had is something we're very proud of. We have made sure we have women on the mic with us all the time whenever we record. The whole diversity issue has been very important to us. And for me in particular, I got really tired of running into car clubs around here that were, I don't want to use the word misogynistic, but kind of sexist. And I'm like, who wouldn't want cool women around who can talk about and tinker with their cars, right? I'm like, yeah, right. So when they come around, let's be nice, right? Let's just
right.
But we're very fortunate to have folks who love to drive and love to work on cars and just talk about cars. The show itself, I jokingly say, is the Seinfeld of automotive cars or automotive podcasts. It's about nothing in particular. It's about anything goes as long as it has something to do with cars. And we've even occasionally done the thing about motorcycles, just because, it's all about being on the road and getting some freedom and some fresh air and just seeing things, right? Just being with each other and seeing things. And there's a certain romantic appeal to road trips and stuff like that we occasionally get into. But that's what we do. Anything goes as long as it has something to do with driving.
That's cool you brought up junkyards, man, because I used to do that. Me and a friends of mine would go junking. We just go to the junkyard and walk around and see what's there and do the exact same thing. It's been a long time, but that brought back, I had one of the best cars I ever had. It was a 91 Buick Century, and there's a junkyard on the other side of the river here, that Speedway, and they had a ton of them. And you just go over there and just see what we could find. No, I love it. It brings back a lot of great memories.
I ended up walking out of that scrapyard with a word of advice or a word of warning to anyone who might have access to a scrapyard, which is if you're holding onto a ton of scrap, don't hold on to it. Because everything in that yard had, just entropy had taken its toll on everything that we might have wanted to take our, to put our hands on. Nothing there, unless I wanted to rebuild an entire body from scratch, and I'm not that good of a fabricator, right? So it was just nuts how much stuff in there had simply had been treasures that turned into trash just for the want of some attention. So if people who are in the scrap business and they have old cars that are just sitting in a yard, please convince them not to let them just sit in the yard. So yeah,
it seems like everybody that has this project, it always is like, oh, I'm gonna do this, and then they get into it, and then it's like, oh wow, I spent a lot of money on this. But I'm not done yet.
Right.
I'm going to spend a little bit more money. Now I'm not done. And then they come to Auto Agent, and then they want to sell their car, and they want to get all their money out of their car that they put into it. And it's like,
That's not how it works. Yeah.
So Mickey, how did you develop your love for cars? I mean, how did that start? What was your inspiration to, be fascinated with? I loved what you talked about, the road trip. I love taking road trips. There's nothing better than the open road and just cruising around. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like flying, but there's something to me more nostalgic on taking a road trip and actually having absolutely no idea where you're going. We're just going to drive and we're going to see where we end.
Yep. I don't really know how to answer that question. I've been asked that question before. I asked myself that question. And ever since I was a very small child, I like taking things apart and putting them back together again. So that's kind of
You're the kid that took apart Dad's lawnmower and said, "Good luck figuring out."
Right. Or much to my mom's chagrin, I took apart the Etch-a-Sketch on her brand new sofa one day. That was an interesting day. But yeah, so it's that tinkering, that shade tree mechanic aspect is, yeah, exactly. And cars, I don't know what it is about cars that really have always, no pun intended, turned my crank.
Sure.
But there's just this weird, comfortable place where, it's sort of archetypal. My own background's in mental health and psychology, so I borrow that vocabulary a lot.
Sure.
But there's something archetypal about taking care of your horse, and
it
your
definitely takes mental health to take something apart. I tell everybody, if you want to do what I do, it takes two things: time and patience.
Yes, exactly. And so getting into the zone with the mechanical aspects of taking care of your car, I call it the horse, right? Your ability to get out of and go somewhere and do something. So there's just something there about car maintenance and its connection between you and your ability to do things, right? And especially in this country. Exactly. It's exactly right. And I like driving. I like, putting my foot in the fuel injectors and going as fast as I possibly can. And, one of these days, if I can afford it, I'll take some lessons on real stunt driving and course driving, because I've never done that. But I just like driving. It doesn't even matter what it is. I like driving big trucks. I like driving.
Me too.
Yeah. So,
I've always wanted to go down to Richard Petty's driving experience, drive NASCAR. I see him and I'm like, man, I'd love to.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, exactly. And I've
Yeah,
seen
I get it, man.
I've seen a 2-seater open wheel, like Formula One kind of car, and it's just insane. They put passengers in the back seat of that thing and drive around. Yeah, I can't remember. I can't remember where that was. It might be in Europe somewhere, but yeah, someone has mocked up, or rather made, a Formula One type of car. I'm not sure it's an actual Formula One engine, but it still goes like a bat out of hell. And then, and when you're large like me, and by large I mean fat, I'm not going to fit into that thing. But yeah, I've seen the tapes, man. Those people go from 0 to 100 like that, and they're just it. Yeah.
What's the coolest car you've ever driven?
The coolest car I have ever driven was a Yugo. No, I'm just kidding.
I saw some of your stuff on the Yugo.
Cool.
Yugo would be pretty cool. Let's see. The coolest car I have ever driven. It might have been a second generation Corvette. That was pretty cool. Doing the car show thing, we get exposed to a lot of different things. Say again, David?
I'm trying to think when the second generation came out. What, 1958?
I think 60s. I think that's right.
Oh,
I thought
Dave,
it was earlier.
We didn't know that, buddy.
I think that's right. So I, briefly, and when I say drive, I'm like, I probably got to take it to the end of the driveway and back.
Hey, you made it move. That's a drive.
That's right. But unfortunately, I don't think I have a very good resume when it comes to stuff that I've actually driven that's noteworthy. Most of what I've driven is kind of mundane.
Yeah, but I think it's really cool how you market your company too, like your podcast, I should say. Just the Seinfeld of cars, and that's kind of what I got out of it when I was looking in, like, should we have this guy on the show? And I'm like, man, this is very interesting what he does, and the fact that it's all raw and uncut. So I think that's just really, really attractive for people. People just want to see real, like when you see reality shows and crap out there, it's like it's all fake. It's entertaining, but it's fake.
Yep. We are actually working on a couple of television treatments with the intention of possibly scraping together some money and shooting a pilot for the thing about cars, because all of us very keenly want to do the more of a video presence around cars. We could talk about cars day and night, and certainly there are many successful podcasts that do that, but we think ultimately people want to see them, right? People want to see what you're talking about and share that there's this word I'm looking for, vicarious experience of what it means to look at these cars with you and climb behind the wheel and do these things. So we have some ideas we're documenting now. It's kind of hard to do when everybody who's on your panel is working a full-time job, and we barely have enough time to properly edit an audio episode, never mind a video episode. So there's some speed bumps, but we're overcoming them.
So just to give you, and Dave, I don't know if you know this, but when I first started iAutoAgent in 2015, our company was marketed in LA for a reality show. And it sounded really, really good, because they're like, oh, wow, you guys are real estate agents for cars. I've never heard of this before. So then they marketed it in LA. The potential, producers, or I'm sorry, casting directors came back to us and they're like, well, they like it. But do you work with your brother? Do you, I'm like, well, no. And they're like, well, do you want to? I'm like, no. Do you sell exotic cars? I'm like, we can. Well, if you did exotic cars and you work with your brother, they may be interested. I'm like, no. It's like, I don't want to do that. It's like my brother has a completely different profession than me.
People want to see real people, and real people aren't doing exotic cars.
Well, reality TV has nothing to do with reality either. Mm-mm. It's like it's par for the course for them to come to the table and say, we like what you do, but can you change what you do?
Well, it's just unique how you have that. And as we get into the second phase of the show, I just want to first of all thank our sponsors once again, podcastify.me. They are the ones that make this thing absolutely beautiful. We're sitting here talking with Micky Desai of The Thing About Cars, the Seinfeld type of episodes in the podcast. I love that. And then if you're just joining us, please comment on YouTube. And if you want to subscribe to YouTube, you just click the right button saying subscribe, click the notification button, put some comments in there. We want to hear your feedback. And you can go to our website, theautoauthorities.com. That's theautoauthorities.com. And you can send us messages. You can even do voice messages now on our website. And we have some really, really cool things that you can do. And then finally, if you want to watch us live at 12 p.m. Central Time on Tuesday afternoon, you can go to the Facebook, not a page, but a group, Facebook group, and you can click the join group button. But we're going to go into our second phase of the show, and we're talking with Micky Desai of The Thing About Cars. I want to hear some crazy car stories. Who wants to hear crazy stories? Raise your hand.
I do.
Story time. We like story time, don't we, Dave?
Is Bobby involved?
Oh, is Bobby listening?
I don't know.
Is Bobby? Who's Bobby?
Bobby? Okay, so we have characters in our show.
Oh.
So we have Guido. Guido is the manager at the dealer. Guido's brother is the sales manager at the dealer. And then Guido's cousin is the finance manager. And then we have this client named Bobby. He is actually based on a real character. He makes very bad decisions. So anytime we talk about things like stories, Bobby's usually involved in making very bad decisions. Bobby does everything you shouldn't do. So we have all these characters that are part of our group. And it's like, well, when you go to the dealership, you meet Guido. He's standing there at the window and everybody knows that. And then you meet Guido's cousin and it's all, that's kind of how people feel about dealers. Now, we have some great dealers that we work with that don't play those games, but there are some dealers that do play those games. And,
sure.
And that's what we talk about. We talk about buying, selling, and repairing cars. So we want to hear your crazy stories, though, think about something maybe that, that sticks out in your mind, because we all like stories.
Sure.
I know you got some crazy stories about the junkyard, because I know you got some.
Well, what I've got to share today is a couple stories. We occasionally poll our social media audience to send to us their worst car stories ever. Like tell us about the worst car you ever owned. So I've got a couple of those to share. But one crazy thing that will set off every mechanic in the room is a good friend of mine some years ago said, Mickey, something's wrong with my car. So I went up to take a look at it and I said, well, what's been happening? And she says, it's been making these funny noises. It drives kind of weird. It overheats, blah, blah, blah. So I'm starting to look at it. I'm literally opening the hood when she says, and the check oil light keeps going on and off. And I'm like, oh no. I'm like, the check oil light it only came on a few times. I'm like, So, sure enough, new engine later, it was
fixed.
It was fixed. So if your check oil light comes on and blinks even a little bit, lesson learned, don't mess around with that. Don't wait. So the first
doing the curly shuffle, it sounded like it was doing the curly shuffle.
It just kind of blew my mind that you would let that happen. And anyway, so can I share a story from my friend Amy?
Of course.
Absolutely. You could share any stories. We want to hear stories. I know our listening audience does, definitely.
So Amy shares a story about the worst car she ever owned. She says it was a Chrysler LeBaron convertible. And the first thing she says in writing her little paragraph to us, the first sentence is literally, what a lemon. She says, seriously, I have too many stories to tell about that car. After the top was ripped from a break-in, the car alarm speaker was cut, but the alarm wasn't disconnected properly. So all the lights would start randomly blinking while she was driving it. The fuel injectors were leaking one time and the engine was on fire, but I didn't know it because I was on the highway. When I finally pulled up to my apartment and parked, the entire thing burst into flames. In the end, I had to start it by turning the key a certain way while at the same time popping the hood. And I'm like, what do you have to do? You have to achieve this sort of weird position. How do you pop the hood? And and turned the key at the same time. And it was just,
I remember those. Those were still on the road.
What year was it? What year was it?
I don't know, but I saw one the other day. It was like mid to late 80s, if I'm not
Those
mistaken.
were 80s and then up to the mid 90s. They had them, if I remember.
I mean, they were cool little cars, right? They were cool little.
Yeah. No, it's Chrysler Lehigh Coca sold the you know what out of them.
Exactly. But on the other hand, I wonder what would have happened to her car if it had not been broken into. But anyway, all right. So my friend Leslie shares a good long story here about her car. She says her most recent car, a 2000 Honda Civic. She says she bought it from her mechanic when her 1996 Mercury Cougar finally kicked the bucket.
Ooh.
I'm just going to quote her. She says, my mechanic had been holding it together for me up until around 210,000 miles, but finally told me it was time. I needed a car right away, so they sold me their old beater loaner Civic. It had been in a bad hailstorm and 2 accidents. The plastic bumpers were cracked in the front and the back. There were dents large enough to put my hand into. The day I bought it, I went to get gas and the driver's side door handle broke off when I tried to get back in the car. I had to crawl in through the passenger side until I could scrounge the $350 to have the door taken apart and a new handle installed. I spent about $3,000 in total on various repairs over 7 years, which was honestly a steal, she says.
Yeah, those old Honda Civics from that dude, you couldn't kill them.
I was going to say,
not kill those.
Right, $3,000 over the course of 7 years is not bad.
No, you can't beat that.
Right.
She probably paid $500 for it.
Yeah, she might even say that here. Nope, you're gonna laugh when you figure out what she paid for it. She goes on. She says it was the ugliest car I had ever owned. The paint faded to a dull dark gray. There were only 2 hubcaps. The interior headliner looked like Freddy Krueger had gone wild in there. It leaked. It leaked from the driver's side window and the trunk whenever it rained. The passenger window had a short, so if someone rolled it down, it only rolled back up 30% of the time. I'd have to take it on bumpy roads and jostle it around until the switch started working again. Like you have to drive on a bumpy road just to get the windows to close. That's hilarious. She says she spent 6 months a few years ago trying to figure out why the battery kept dying whenever she parked and getting jumps from random people until she finally figured out it was her brake light stop switch that had gone bad.
Yep.
Yeah. So I was kind of surprised to hear that too. It's like brake light stop switch.
From a shop?
Why would that
be from her mechanic?
So it must have, when my brake light stop switch goes bad, it just, there's no more brake light. That's it. It's not draining the battery.
Yeah.
So, but she says she fixed it by duct taping 2 pennies into the slot. And as far as I know, that fix is still going strong today. Here's where we find out how much she paid for the car. She said she originally bought it for $2,200 7 years ago and decided just to drive it until it fell apart. It was at 240,000 miles and it had not been washed in 4 years by the time she got rid of it. And the last sentence is she finally traded it in 2 weeks ago for a 2017 WRX and could not be happier.
On a tree.
That's amazing.
I'm sure some dealership took it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, they probably didn't give her nothing for it. Said, we'll get rid of it for you.
Exactly. They're like, we'll just leave it and take this out of circulation for the benefit of humanity.
Exactly. Did they charge her to take it?
Yeah, I'm sure they did.
I've had
a surprise. It's because those were scrap.
Yep.
I've had so many people tell me like, oh, I've got this car I want to sell, and like, yeah, but I literally had somebody call me and said, hey, you want to buy it? It's on the side of the road. It won't move. I don't even know what's going on with it. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds really, really enticing.
I don't know what's wrong with it. It may not even start. Would you please buy it? No. Yeah, no, absolutely not. But yeah, so just a couple of short worst car stories to sell, and we do any number of things like this on the show from time to time. We do automotive trivia. We usually start and end each episode by asking and answering a trivia question. Right now, we have so much trivia in the can that we might actually just do an entire episode of car trivia. So it's just fun. We just have fun. We're just a bunch of geeks who like to geek out about cars, and that's what we do.
Yeah, I mean, you do have the personality for it, and And
Yeah,
the
this is
lady,
awesome. Because I
Thank you.
remember those Civics. I remember the LeBarons.
Exactly.
Those were on the road a lot of them were still on the road when I got into this in the late 90s.
Yep. My 86 Civic was actually in great shape by the time I got rid of it, except for one thing. And I had cracked the carburetor base plate. And so it was like, that just on the cusp of that moment where carburetors were starting to get phased out in favor of fuel injected engines. And I drove the hell out of that thing, man. It was physically in fantastic shape, but that carburetor and there was one other repair I had to make to the thing over time. After a while, it's just like, I just don't want to spend the time on the Civic anymore. So I got the next car, which was a Honda Prelude, and I drove the hell out of that too.
I love
Yeah.
those.
I remember those. Man, if you
Yep.
could find one today in good shape, they're worth a lot of money.
Prelude, man, poor man's
Yeah.
Porsche. Those things went like a rocket. They were fantastic.
I loved them. I'll tell you a story. So when I moved out to LA for a year, my daughter was an actress, got signed by a manager and agent.
Mhm.
And at first I had leased a vehicle, bad idea, because I was driving massive amounts of miles and I had to get out of it. So I wanted to buy a car for cash. So California is a pretty shady place, I got to tell you. So when I decided I wanted to buy this car, I met this guy at this. I don't even know why I did this. I was just like desperate for a car. It was $5,000. It was the Civic, and it had this. I'm not Civic. I'm sorry. It was a Prelude. It had this huge tailpipe. When you hit the gas, like you could not even have the windows closed. It was so freaking loud. So the fun part comes is when my in-laws decide to visit from St. Louis. They stayed with us, and I had to take them back to the airport one morning after they were getting ready to leave. Well, they had to ride in the Prelude. Well, as I'm driving, and I drove kind of crazy, and pretty much everybody in California does, we get to the airport, and my father-in-law, and at the time he was in his 70s, he's like, man, my ass is all wet. And I'm thinking, wow. I'm like, I must have drove a little crazy. So I'm not kidding. I didn't think anything of it, went back home, and my wife, Jen, she's like, hey, did my dad tell you that when he got out, his ass was all wet? I'm like, yeah, he sure did. I'm like, I'm sorry I drove crazy. She goes, no, his ass was wet. So I'm like, what? I go in this piece of, let's just call it a piece of crap. I open the trunk. There's standing water in the trunk that's going underneath the back seat, soaking the whole car. So meanwhile, I work a full day and I'm like, holy cow, what the hell do I do? I mean, it's sopping wet. It's like a sponge. I went on YouTube to try to figure out, you would have been proud of me, Dave. I pulled the seat out myself. And in California, things are very hot. We lived in the desert. I put it in my backyard, the back seat, dried it out, took some silicone. There was a gap in the back of this thing. I mean, it was, and you could always hear me coming down the road. And I was like, I got to get rid of this. Anyway.
Prelude's had a couple of known problems. The drainage system from the rain gutters in the car, they would get plugged up kind of easily, and then you'd end up with things like a full trunk. But yeah, I loved that car. It was a fantastic car. My two favorite cars to drive that have been in my own garage, one of them was that Prelude, and another one was a 2005 Mazda 6 Sport, which had a 6-cylinder Ford engine in it.
Yeah, 3-liter.
3-liter, and that engine was at once amazing and terrible all at the same time. And it had an oil leak that was cost prohibitive to fix. Fixing the oil leak would have been worth more than the car itself. But that thing, the power to weight ratio in that car, it was just, and the stance on that car was just right. It was just fun to drive.
They're awesome. They're awesome. In fact, we could probably talk all day long, but I want to end by thanking our special guest, Micky Desai. What an amazing show. I think that our audience is just going to love your energy and your stories and whatnot. But how can people listen to your podcast, Micky?
First of all, you're very kind. Thank you for the kind words, and thank you for having me on as your guest today. If people want to listen to us, go to thethingaboutcars.com, and there's a list there on every way in the world to find us. Otherwise, obviously, we're on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and a few other outlets as well. But the biggest ones, of course, are Apple and Google, and most of our fans find us that way.
Yeah, it was awesome. And I'm glad that our producer, Fritz, with podcastify.me got us connected. And we'll definitely, we would love to have you on again at a later time.
Absolutely. I enjoyed this. This was a blast. It was like a trip down memory lane for me.
Thank you. Yes, likewise. I hope we can do this again sometime for sure.
Well, thanks to everybody. We will be back next week. Have an amazing week, and peace.